Now, football rivalries exist all over the world. As South Africa prepares for the Soweto derby tomorrow, we look at how it measures up to some of the big derbies in the world and the continent, from El Classico in Spain, the Old Firm derby in Scotland, der Klassiker in the Netherlands, and even Mashemeji derby in Kenya. Where does the Soweto derby rank? Is it as popular? Football journalist and author Joe Crann joins us now to answer some of those questions. Joe, a very good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you very much for having me. Always a pleasure to talk about this game. Thank
you so much for coming through. Joe, now, it is a very big game in South Africa. Literally, people will tell you that the country comes to a standstill. You've experienced this yourself. As far as the world is concerned, I mean, where would you rate the derby? Does it even get mentioned when we talk about some of the big derbies in the world?
The Soweto derby is an interesting one because I think for people that consider themselves to be sort of worldly football fans, it is one that they sort of point out because of the sheer size of it. The amount of people that head through to the game is incredible. I mean, I think if you're looking purely on numbers, it is up there with the biggest derbies in the world because of 100,000 people going over to the game. But it's interesting. I think from my perspective in the UK, there's a lot of people in the UK know Kaizer Chiefs. There's a lot of people there know Orlando Pirates. But I think if you were to ask them about the derby between the two, that wouldn't necessarily be on their radar. They don't know per se about the Soweto derby. They just know that those are the two biggest teams in South Africa. But I'm sort of like a walking billboard for the Soweto derby. I tell all my football friends, all my fellow journalists in different countries that if there's one derby they need to get to before they die, it's this one.
And I mean, even Ian Wright, who I'm told has nailed his colours to the mast as a Buccaneer, knows that the big derby is happening. So if people like Ian Wright, a legend in his own right, knows about the derby, it means there is something to talk about there. But is it a question of exposure, Joe, that makes it maybe people not aware of such a big... because in Africa, we arguably... at least in the top two, one can say that. So is it a question of exposure of the game itself to the rest of the world, to the UK and other European countries?
I think so. I think the other thing is that, the African game is not so accessible in terms of football tourism. I think, if you're in Europe and you are, say you live in Italy or Spain and you want to get to AC Milan, Inter Milan, if you want to get to Barca Real, if you want to get to United City, those sort of things, it's something that a lot of European football fans will do. They'll even head out to Turkey and places like that to watch Galatasaray, Besiktas, Fenerbahce, those kinds of teams. But obviously getting over to a Soweto derby, if you're in Europe, for instance, is a lot more difficult to do. But I do think, obviously the exposure of it in terms of the television side of things, it's not a game that's, particularly shown on British TV, for instance. So yeah, I think that is definitely a big part of it because I always think there's something really special about the Soweto derby. I think there's when you look at something like the segregation side of things with the game, you go to any derby in the world, like say all those ones I just mentioned, Celtic Rangers is as big as it gets. Those fans cannot physically be put together. It's too dangerous to do that. The fact that you can go to a Soweto derby and that Chiefs and Pirates fans will sit together and, I've been going to derbies for years and I've never really seen any trouble. And I think that makes it such a unique spectacle. I took my mum and dad one year. I got them over from the UK, took them to the derby. And, my dad, who has been taking me to football games since I was 4 years old, I remember looking over to him. He was just stood there, just watching the fans and looking at the interactions and the way that people sort of dealt with each other. And I think it's a derby unlike any other in the world for me.
And I think that's the whole, something that makes it unique, that South African football fans can sit together. Families can come, one wearing a Pirates jersey and a Chiefs jersey, and sit together and watch the game. And where we see in other parts of the world, the rivals, I mean, if you go to North London, there's some areas that you can't even wear an Arsenal jersey, just walking down the street. So do you think that is something that, again, beyond the football itself, makes it so big and so unique as far as derbies are concerned in Africa?
I just think it's really, really special. I mean, I think South Africa in general has an energy about it. I've often described it to my friends when I speak about like living here and being here, that there's an energy about this country. And I don't think it's ever more prevalent than when the derby's on. You see that the way that people take to that day, the build up to it, the vibe in the stadium, just everything that comes with it is such a. I find it such a wholesome football experience. I remember my first derby. The first derby I did was not as a journalist. Actually, I did it. I think it was maybe 2012 potentially. Benny scored twice for
Oh, yeah.
Pirates. And I remember walking out at into the stands. I sat in the, obviously wasn't in the press box then. I walked out into the seats, and I just got like this full body goosebumps walking out and hearing the noise and the songs and the vuvuzelas. And yeah, it's a derby that like I say, it really captures the imagination for me, and I think it's one that deserves a lot more credit and a lot more sort of news than it actually gets.
Crann, let's end quickly, if I can put you on the spot. Where do you see this one going tomorrow?
Don't do that to me. Look, I think it's very difficult to look past the great work that Pirates have been doing this season. I mean, I know that the derby sort of, as the old cliche goes, you sort of throw form out the window, but I think it's going to be tight, as these games always are. I mean, like I say, I've been to a lot of them, and you very rarely see one where a team walks away with it with any sort of ease. But yeah, I think a narrow Pirates victory, and I apologise to Amakosi on this one.
Joe Crann, thank you very much for coming through to speak to us, a football journalist and author Joe Crann.